The wind screamed across the tundra like a living thing, clawing at the prefab walls of Forward Listening Post 19. Inside, Lieutenant Elias Holt pressed his gloved hands against the frost-laced window and watched the northern lights ripple green and violet above the black pines. 40 below, the thermometer said. 45 with wind chill. Another ordinary February night in what used to be Manitoba. Elias was 29, lean from too many months of short rations, with eyes the color of glacier melt and a beard that had stopped pretending to be neat weeks ago. He hadn't seen real daylight in 73 days. The sun was a rumor now, a pale coin that barely cleared the horizon before surrendering again. He should have been asleep. Instead, he stood watch alone, listening to the way his grandfather had taught him, ears tuned not just to machines, but to the land itself. The snow had a voice if you knew how to hear it. Tonight it was restless, a soft chime from the console behind him. Elias turned, boots crunching on the salt someone had scattered to keep the floor from icing. The long-range array had picked up something. Not a ping, not an echo. A pattern, deliberate, repeating. He sat, breath fogging in the cold air of the bunker, and pulled the headphones over his ears. Static hissed like frying fat, then cleared. A low thrumming, almost sub-audible, layered beneath a carrier wave that tasted. There was no other word of alien. Mathematics. Elias felt the hairs on his neck rise. He'd spent 6 years on this post waiting for ghosts. Tonight the ghosts had names. He keyed the secure line south to Norcom. Valkyrie Actual. This is Frostbite 19er. We have unidentified hyperspatial signatures bearing 040 high orbit. Multiple vectors. This is not a drill. A pause. Then Colonel Okonkwo's voice, calm as lake ice. Confirm, Frostbite. You're saying we've got company? Affirmative, ma'am. And they're coming in hot. Another pause longer. Elias could almost hear her weighing the end of the world. Scramble everything that can fly, she said. Wake the continent. Elias killed the channel and stared at the scope. Dozens of new signatures blooming like blood in water. Hundreds. They were beautiful in the way an avalanche is beautiful, vast, unstoppable. And utterly indifferent. He reached under his parka and closed, his fingers around the small wooden cross his mother had pressed into his hand the day he shipped north. The wood was warm from his skin. He didn't pray often, words felt too small for what he carried, but tonight he whispered anyway, if you're listening. We could use a little help. Outside, the wind changed direction, sharp and sudden, the way it does when a new weather system shoulders the old one aside. Elias felt it in his bones before the instruments confirmed it. A polar vortex was sliding south, dragging air straight from the Arctic Ocean. Temperatures were about to plummet. Another 20 degrees. He smiled without humor. The aliens had chosen the worst possible week to invade Canada. Alarms began to wail across the base deep, mournful moans that carried for kilometers over the snow. Lights snapped on in every Quonset hut. Men and women spilled out in parkas and bunny boots. Rifles slung, faces already hardening into the thaw. Expression Elias knew too well, the look of people who had been cold, and hungry before, and were willing to be cold. And hungry again if it meant the people behind them got to stay warm. Sergeant Myra, Desai 5'0" of Mumbai steel wrapped in Carhartt, appeared at his elbow. Sky's full of them, they're dropping pods already. Elias glanced at the external cams. The first meteors were streaking down, silent and blazing scars against the aurora. Except they weren't meteors. Each one decelerated at the last second, unfurling into angular black shapes that looked grown rather than built. All knife edges and bone-white heat shielding. One touched down 3 kilometers east, kicking up a geyser of snow that flash froze into glittering dust before it could fall back to Earth. Temperature at impact site? Elias asked. Mira checked her tablet. -51 and dropping. Their hulls are already frosting over. Elias exhaled a plume of white. They don't know what they just stepped into. He grabbed his rifle, an ancient but reliable C-19 chambered in .338 Lapua, wrapped in white tape against the cold, and headed for the door. Mira fell in beside him without being asked. Outside, the air hit like a slap from God. Elias's eyelashes iced instantly. His nostrils stuck together with every breath. But the cold was honest. It didn't pretend to be anything it wasn't. Unlike the things, now crawling out of their pods, the first alien stepped into the floodlights and Elias felt his stomach drop, 15 feet tall. Segmented armor the color of wet obsidian. 4 arms, 2 legs, a head too small for the body, faceted eyes reflecting the base lights into 1,000 shards of red. It moved wrong too fluid, like something that had evolved in low gravity and never learned how heavy the world could be. Behind it, more emerged. Dozens, hundreds. An army designed for conquest on garden worlds where winter was a season. Not a sentence. One of them raised a weapon that looked like a shard of starlight and fired. The bolt carved a trench through the snow, flash-boiling a channel of water that froze again almost instantly. Elias dropped to a knee, sighted, exhaled half a breath, and squeezed. The .338 round crossed the distance in less than a second and punched through the alien's faceplate. Black fluid jetted, flash freezing into glittering spirals. The creature toppled like a felled pine, limbs locking rigid in the cold. For a heartbeat, the tundra was silent except for the wind. Then the rest of the aliens screamed a sound like metal tearing and charged. Elias worked the bolt, chambered another round. Around him the defenders of Post 19 opened fire. Old rifles, older tricks. They didn't aim for center mass. They aimed for joints, for the glowing seams in the armor where heat bled warmth. Every hit bought seconds. Every second let the cold do its work. Mira's grenade launcher coughed. A thermobaric round arced high and came down in the middle of the alien line. The explosion was almost gentle until the superheated air met -50 cold and condensed into a rolling fog. When it cleared, half the invaders were on their knees, armor crazed with frost, limbs twitching as hydraulics seized. Elias felt something vast and quiet settle in his chest. Not triumph, recognition that these creatures had crossed light years to kill them. They had ships that bent space, weapons that drank starlight. And they were going to die because they didn't bring coats. He keyed his throat mic. All stations, this is Holt. Fall back to secondary line. Let the weather fight for us. Behind him, the bass loudspeakers crackled. Someone had patched in music Johnny Cash. God's gonna cut you down. The bass line thumped across the snow like a heartbeat. The aliens hesitated. Maybe they felt it too, the sense that something older than their empire was waking up under the ice. Elias turned and ran with the others, boots kicking up powder that glittered like diamond dust in the floodlights. Overhead, the sky split open as the first real wave of dropships descended. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. He could hear it, armor cracking like glass, alien voices rising into high-pitched keenings that sounded almost human in their confusion. The temperature gauge on the outer wall read -58 and still falling. Elias smiled into the wind, teeth aching with cold. Heart strangely like that welcome to Earth, he thought. Mind the weather, and somewhere above the roar of engines and the crack of rifles, beneath the aurora and the indifferent stars, he heard, or imagined he heard, a low, quiet chuckle, patient as glaciers. Vast as winter itself, the first night of the invasion had only just begun. The retreat was orderly only on paper. In truth, it was a running fight through waist-deep snow, muzzle flashes strobing white against the dark, breath freezing into ice fog that hung like ghosts in the air. Elias Holt led his people west along the old Hudson Bay rail bed, Now nothing more than two parallel ridges of wind-scoured ballast under the drifts. The aliens followed, relentless, their long legs punching through the crust and slowing them just enough. Behind them, Post 19 burned. Not from fire barely worked at these temperatures, but from the white-blue glare of alien plasma eating through fuel tanks and ammunition. The explosion sounded muffled, cotton-wrapped, as if even sound itself was too cold to travel far. Elias's lungs burned with every breath. The air was so dry it felt like inhaling broken glass. He tasted iron. Somewhere to his left, Private Leclerc was sobbing quietly as he ran, tears freezing on his cheeks in silver tracks. No one told him to stop. They all understood. They reached the tree line at 03:07 hours. Black spruce, stunted and hunched like old men, offered the first real cover in 20 kilometers. Elias waved the column to ground and vanished among the trunks. "Dig in," he ordered, voice raw. "Snow caves, fighting holes, whatever you can manage. They're still coming." Hands numb even inside triple gloves, the survivors obeyed. Shovels bit into powder that poured back almost as fast as it was moved. Elias dropped beside Mira and started carving his own position with the entrenching tool strapped to his pack. "How many did we lose?" he asked. 12 confirmed. 8 missing. Could be worse. She didn't look at him. She was staring back the way they'd come, eyes reflecting the distant fires. "They're not stopping, El. They're angry now." He followed her gaze. Through the swirling snow, he could see the aliens advancing in a ragged crescent, heat signatures glowing on the thermal scope like lanterns. Their armor was frosting over, great feathered rimes of horror building on joints and weapon barrels. Every few steps one would stumble, servos whining, and the others would simply step over it. "They're learning," Elias said quietly. "Learning that cold kills faster than bullets." Mira spat blood-flecked ice. "Not fast enough." A new sound cut through the wind, a rising mechanical howl. Elias knew it instantly. He'd heard recordings and briefings no one was supposed to survive long enough to need. Reapers. He said the aliens' heavy infantry was coming. They came out of the blizzard like moving cathedrals. 25 feet tall, 6 legs. A thorax bristling with weapon pods. Each footfall sent seismic tremors through the frozen ground. Their armor was thicker, layered with some kind of adaptive lattice that shimmered between black and white as it tried to bleed heat into an environment that devoured warmth like a starving thing. The first one fired. A lance of violet energy carved a trench through the spruce, flash-melting trees into steaming craters that refroze almost instantly into glassy scars. Splinters of wood exploded outward, some still burning with pale chemical flames. Elias's people returned fire on instinct. Small arms pinned uselessly off the Reaper's plating. Someone screamed as return fire found them. Then the cold answered. One of the Reaper's legs locked mid-stride. The joint flash froze, metal contracting faster than the actuators could compensate. The entire machine tilted, tried to correct, and toppled with a sound like a skyscraper falling. It hit the snow and did not get up. Steam hissed from ruptured coolant lines, freezing into glittering plumes. The second Reaper hesitated. That hesitation cost it everything. From the ridgeline above, a single shot cracked, deep and authoritative. A 20 mm anti-materiel round from the long-forgotten railgun emplacement someone had remembered to unlimber. It struck the Reaper just below the thorax and punched through. Secondary explosions rippled up the spine. The machine staggered, weapon pods drooping like wilted flowers, and knelt in the snow as if in prayer. Silence fell, broken only by the wind and the soft ticking of cooling metal. Elias realized he was grinning. A savage, terrible thing. "They still think this is a battle," he said to no one in particular. "They haven't figured out it's an execution." Mira looked at him, eyes wide. "You're enjoying this?" "No," he said, and the grin faded. But I'm not afraid anymore. He keyed the all-hands channel. Listen up. We are not retreating further tonight. We hold here until dawn. The temperature is dropping to -65. Their machines will fail. Their bodies will fail. Ours won't. We were born for this. A pause. Then voices answered, some shaking, some steady, answered across the net. Copy, Lieutenant. Born for it. See you at sunrise, sir. Elias killed the channel and looked up. The aurora had shifted to a deep blood red, curtains of light rippling like battle standards. For a moment he felt something vast watching. Not cruel, not kind, simply present. The way gravity is present. The way winter is present. He thought of his mother again, back in what was left of Toronto, probably huddled in a basement with a candle in her rosary. He wondered if she could feel him thinking about her across half a continent of darkness, a soft crunch of snow. Mira settled beside him, offering a thermos. Real coffee, scavenged from the commander's private stash. It steamed like dragon's breath. Drink, she said. Orders. He obeyed. The heat hurt going down, a good hurt. Mira, he said quietly, you ever wonder why we're still here? After the warming, the wars, the collapse. Why any of us are still fighting? She was silent a long time. Then, my grandmother used to say the world doesn't end with a bang or a whimper. It ends when people stop believing tomorrow is worth freezing for. Elias looked at the alien army still struggling across the snow, dying by inches, and felt something ancient stir in his chest. Not pride. Not hate. Faith. Not in governments long fallen. Not in machines. In the stubborn, stupid refusal of human beings to lie down and die just because the universe told them to. He capped the thermos and handed it back. Dawn's in 4 hours, he said. Let's go remind them what winter is. They moved out in pairs, ghosts in white, slipping between the trees like smoke. Their weapons were old, their ammunition finite, their bodies pushed past endurance. None of that mattered, because the cold was on their side, and the cold never sleeps. Far behind them, another reaper toppled. Its dying lights painting the snow in alien colors that looked, for just a moment, like the gates of hell freezing over. Elias paused at the edge of a clearing and looked up one last time. The stars were sharp enough to cut yourself on. Somewhere beyond them, something vast and quiet breathed. He touched the wooden cross at his throat. Thank you, he whispered. Not sure to whom, for making us too dumb to quit. Then he stepped into the storm. And the night swallowed him whole. Dawn never truly came. It only bled a sickly gray along the horizon, a bruise-colored promise that the sun existed somewhere above the cloud deck. At -68 Celsius, the air itself seemed to crystallize. Every breath was a knife, every exhalation a white banner that froze and fell like ash. Elias Holt moved through the spruce like a wolf that had forgotten how to be afraid. His beard was a mask of rime, his eyelashes white feathers. The cold had gone past pain now and settled into something almost wholly clean, merciless. Absolute. They had spent the night bleeding the invaders, small teams, hit and run. A shaped charge here, a thermite grenade there. Never enough to kill a reaper outright, just enough to crack a joint, rupture a coolant line, let the night finish the job. By 0500 the tundra was littered with alien colossi frozen mid-stride. Their faceted eyes dimmed to dull ruby coals. Now the main body was coming, thousands of the tall. 4-armed infantry, marching in perfect formation that grew ragged with every kilometer. Their armor, once mirror black, was furred with hoarfrost thick as wolf pelts. Some dragged useless limbs. Others had torn plating away in frantic attempts to vent heat that no longer existed. They looked, Elias thought, like statues trying to remember how to walk. He lay prone on a ridge beside Mira and Corporal Park, a 19-year-old Korean-Canadian kid whose cheeks were black with frostbite, but whose eyes still burned. "Count?" Elias asked. Park glassed the valley with a battered thermal scope. 4,000, give or take. 2 reapers still mobile. They've learned to keep them in the center now, like elephants guarding calves. Mira snorted softly. Calves that weigh 40 tons and shoot lightning. Elias studied the advancing line. The aliens had adapted overnight. Some carried portable fusion heaters the size of coffins, glowing cherry red. Others had wrapped their joints in what looked like emergency thermal, blankets torn from their own drop pods. Clever, not clever enough. He keyed the battalion net. Voice calm as lake ice. "All Wolf packs, this is Alpha 1. Operation Aurora Borealis is green." "Repeat, green." Let them come. Another 3 clicks. Then we dance. A ripple of acknowledgments. Short, professional. No one wasted breath on jokes anymore. Elias clicked off and turned to Mira. "You sure about this?" She checked the timer on her wrist. Geostorm peaks in 41 minutes. After that, the ionosphere lights up like Christmas, and every unshielded circuit on this continent fries. Their fleet included. "And if the storm shifts? Then we die cold and stupid." She grinned, teeth startlingly white against her frost-blackened lips. "Same way we lived." Elias felt that vast quiet settle over him again. 41 minutes to save or doom what was left of humanity. He thought of his little sister, last seen at age 9, somewhere south in the refugee corridors. He thought of his mother's voice on the last working radio. "Come home when the war's over." "Ile, I'll keep the light on." He touched the wooden cross, now encased in a thin sheath of ice. "Park," he said. "You still got that drone?" The kid patted a pack. 2 left. Armed with MP warheads. Range 8 clicks in this wind, maybe. "Good. When I give the word, you send them straight up the middle. Make the Reapers flinch." Park swallowed. "Yes, sir." Elias looked down at the valley one more time. The alien army was beautiful in its terror-perfect ranks. Perfect discipline, perfect arrogance. They had come to a world that had already tried to kill its own children with fire and flood and famine. And somehow humanity had crawled out of the ashes still singing. They would not kneel now. He raised a flare gun and fired. A single red starburst hung above the trees, pulsing like a heartbeat from every ridge, every frozen creek bed, every drift-covered ruin. The wolves rose, not many. Maybe 600 souls all told, the remnants of 3 battalions and whatever civilians had picked up rifles along the way. They wore whatever kept them alive: caribou hides over body armor, hockey masks under balaclavas, snowshoes made from tennis rackets and duct tape. Their weapons were museum pieces and garage builds, and one honest-to-God brown Bess musket carried by a Metis grandmother who claimed it had killed redcoats in 1885, and saw no reason to retire now. They opened fire as 1. The valley became a bowl of thunder. Tracers arced like slow fireflies. Mortar coughed. Someone had jury-rigged a 105mm howitzer onto a snowcat and was walking shells down the alien center with mechanical patience. The front rank of invaders simply ceased to exist. Shredded, blown backward, frozen in the act of dying. But there were always more. Elias watched a Reaper pivot with terrible grace and fire. A beam of violet light carved a smoking trench through a snowbank, flash-boiling the defenders behind it into red steam. He felt the overpressure slap his face even at 2 kilometers. "Park!" he shouted. The kid was already moving, fingers dancing over the drone controller. 2 black dragonflies lifted from the ridge, engines screaming against the cold, and streaked down the valley. The Reapers tracked them. Weapon pods swiveled. The drones never slowed. At 500 meters, they detonated in twin blue-white sunbursts of electromagnetic fury. Both Reapers staggered as every unshielded system shorted at once. One toppled immediately. The second tried to kneel, failed, and fell on its side like a dying god. For one heartbeat, the alien army hesitated. That was all the wolves needed. They came down the slopes in a white avalanche of screaming humans, sliding on shields, on garbage can lids, on nothing at all. Bayonets fixed, knives out. Some carried nothing but axes, and Rage. Elias was among them, rifles slung, a titanium ice axe in each hand. He hit the frozen ground running, boots finding purchase where alien feet sank to the knee. The melee was too close for grandeur. It was teeth and elbows, and the wet sound of blades finding gaps in armor. Elias buried an axe in a joint, felt the alien shudder, wrenched it free slick with black fluid that froze before it hit the snow. Another lunged. He ducked under a plasma blade that flash melted the air above his head and drove the second axe up under the helmet. The creature made a sound like breaking bells and died. All around him the battle dissolved into individual moments of impossible courage. Teenage girl with a hockey stick of dynamite taped to a hockey stick sprinted straight at a fusion heater and blew it, and herself into white fire. An old man in a priest's collar stood in the open, arms wide, singing the Dies Irae in Latin while bullets and plasma whipped around him. Untouched until the song ended and he simply sat down in the snow as if to rest. Mira Desai fought back-to-back with Elias, her cookery a blur, laughing like a mad woman every time an alien fell, and still they were losing ground. The aliens were too many, too tall, too strong. The wolves were being pushed back toward a frozen lake. Elias knew too well, thin ice over deep black water. He felt the shift. The moment the tide turned against them, then the sky caught fire. Not metaphor. The aurora exploded into a corona of green and violet and blood red, so bright it drowned the battlefield in daylight. The geostorm had arrived early. Every alien cum device shrieked. Helmets sparked. Fusion heaters died with popping sounds like gunshots. The remaining Reaper convulsed, weapon pods drooping, and collapsed in slow motion. The invaders froze literally. Armor locked. Limbs seized. Thousands of 15-foot titans became statues in the color of midnight. The humans stopped fighting because there was no one left to fight. Silence fell, broken only by wind and the soft hiss of snow landing on cooling metal. Elias stood in the middle of the carnage, chest heaving, blood freezing on his axe blades. Around him the survivors, fewer than 200 now, looked up at the burning sky with something between terror and worship. Myra dropped to her knees, not from wounds but from sheer awe. "Sweet Jesus," she whispered, "look what you did." Elias felt it too, that vast, quiet presence, closer now, almost tangible. Not a voice, not vision, just the sudden, unshakable knowledge that something had reached down and adjusted the balance. He looked across the frozen lake. On the far side, untouched by battle, a single wolf stood silhouetted against the aurora. Real wolf, gray and huge, eyes reflecting green fire. It regarded him for a long moment, dipped its head once, and vanished into the trees. Elias laughed. A cracked, broken sound that turned into something else entirely. The war wasn't over. The fleet still orbited. Millions more could come, but here now, on this patch of killing ground, humanity had drawn its first real blood. He raised his blood-slick axe to the burning sky. "Round one to us," he said. Far above, the aurora pulsed once, like an answer, and somewhere in low orbit, the first alien mothership began to tumble, its guidance gyros fried, its crew already beginning to freeze in their own corridors. The wolves lifted their voices together, not cheers, but a single low note of pure defiance that rolled across the tundra and would not stop until it reached the edge of space itself. The battlefield belonged to the dead now. Elias Holt walked among the frozen statues of the enemy as the aurora slowly faded to a sullen glow. Every alien warrior stood exactly where the geostorm had caught them, mouths open in silent screams, forearms raised in futile defense, plasma blades half drawn and already iced over. Their blood, black and viscous, had frozen into brittle glass that cracked under his boots like thin ice on a pond. 211. Humans had walked into the valley. 147 walked out. They moved slowly, checking pulses that weren't there, stripping ammunition and batteries from their own fallen first, then, almost gently, from the aliens. No one spoke above a whisper. The silence felt sacred. The way deep winter forests feel sacred, vast, listening. Older than grief. Mira found Elias kneeling beside the body of Corporal Park. The kid's eyes were still open, staring at the sky he had helped set on fire. His drone controller lay shattered beside him, fingers fused to it by frozen blood. "He got both Reapers," Mira said. Her voice cracked on the last word. Elias closed Park's eyes with gloved fingers. "He bought us tomorrow." He stood. Every joint screamed. Somewhere in the night he'd taken a plasma graze across the ribs. The parka had burned away, and the wound had cauterized itself in the cold. It hurt less than the rest of him. "Salvage teams," he called, voice hoarse. "Take everything that isn't nailed down. Their power cells, their weapons, their armor. We've got maybe 6 hours before the next wave wakes up topside and figures out what happened." The survivors moved with the grim efficiency of people who had buried friends before breakfast too many times. They worked in silence, cutting power cores from Reaper torsos with plasma torches, prying faceted helmets off alien dead to reveal faces that looked disturbingly like carved obsidian angels. One soldier, a woman Elias didn't know, paused to cross herself before she sawed the head off a corpse for study. No one commented. Elias found the fusion heater the girl with the dynamite hockey stick had destroyed. Its core was still warm, miraculously. He dragged it back to the center of the lake, set it humming, and within minutes a circle of exhausted humans gathered around the first real heat any of them had felt in months. Someone produced a tin of frozen stew. It thawed in 30 seconds and tasted like heaven. They ate standing up, rifles still in hand, watching the sky. At 0942 hours, the orbital net crackled to life. Colonel Okonkwo's voice, patched through a dozen relay drones that had somehow survived the geostorm. "Frostbite remnants. This is Valkyrie. Report." Elias keyed the mic. "Valkyrie, Frostbite actual. Enemy ground force annihilated. We hold the field. 147 effectives, light wounded only. We have captured intact alien hardware and are preparing mobile defense." A long pause. When Okonkwo spoke again, her voice shook, just slightly. "Copy that, Frostbite. Satellite imagery confirms. Sweet Christ, Elias, you turned an entire corps into lawn ornaments. Stand by for new orders." "Negative, Valkyrie," Elias said. "With respect, ma'am, we're not standing by. We're going hunting." Another pause. Then, almost wondering, "You're going to take the fight to them?" "Yes, ma'am. Their fleet's blind, and half their ships are drifting. We know where the next wave is staging, Ellesmere Island, Old Alert Base. They think we're beaten. We're going to remind them what happens when you kick a hornet's nest in January." He could hear her smile through the static. "Permission granted, Lieutenant." "Hell, permission enthusiastically granted. Godspeed." The channel clicked dead. Elias looked at the circle of faces around the heater. Frostbitten, bleeding, half dead on their feet. Every one of them met his eyes and nodded. They broke camp in 20 minutes. The trek north took 4 days of hell. They moved on stolen. Alien hover skids retrofitted with sails made from parachutes. Skimming across the sea ice at 40 knots when the wind was right. When it wasn't, they walked. Temperatures never rose above -55. The captured fusion heaters were lashed to sleds and became traveling shrines. People took turns standing closest to them, soaking up heat until their turn ended and the next frozen soul stepped in. On the second night, they found an alien dropship that had tried to land during the storm and failed. It lay half buried in a drift, hull split like a cracked egg. Inside, the crew had frozen solid at their stations. Still strapped in, faces contorted in the agony of explosive decompression, followed by cold so absolute it stopped hearts between beats. One of the bodies, an officer, judging by the markings, had clawed at the viewport in its final moments. Its fingers had left bloody streaks that froze into ruby lace. Mira stared at it for a long time. They really thought this would be easy. Elias pried a data shard from the command console. Arrogance is a luxury. We can't afford it either. They took what they could carry and burned the rest. The fire was small and blue and angry, the only warmth for 1,000 kilometers. On the fourth dawn, they crested a pressure ridge and saw Ellesmere. The island rose out of the sea ice like a black tooth. Alert Base, once the northernmost permanently inhabited place on Earth, had been expanded into something monstrous. Alien landing platforms jetted over the cliffs like glass lily. Temporary domes the size of cathedrals glowed with internal heat. Shuttles came and went in steady streams, ferrying fresh troops down from the wounded fleet above. Elias lowered the binoculars. 50,000, maybe more. They're massing for the push south. Mira chewed a strip of frozen caribou. We're 147. 146, someone corrected quietly. They'd lost another to exposure during the night. Elias felt the old weight settle on his shoulders. Not despair, calculation. He turned to the group. We're not here to fight 50,000. We're here to make sure they never leave this island. He laid out the plan in the snow with a kabar knife, scratching lines and circles while the wind tried to erase them. Phase 1. Sabotage the fusion reactors that kept the domes livable. Phase 2. Open every airlock and vent the heat into the atmosphere. Phase 3. Wait. No one argued. No one asked what happened if they failed. They simply checked weapons, shared the last of the coffee, and started moving. They struck at local midnight. When the alien day cycle dimmed the domes to a sullen red, small teams ghosted across the ice on muffled skids. Elias led the reactor group, 6 people, 4 captured plasma cutters, and enough det cord to circle a city block. Security was heavier than expected. Patrols of fresh troops in sealed, heated armor swept the perimeter with searchlights that stabbed white across the snow. Twice they had to lie flat while beams passed inches overhead. They reached the primary reactor dome without raising alarm. A single guard stood at the maintenance hatch, taller than the others, armor adorned with silver runes. It turned as Elias rose from the snow like a resurrection. The fight was short and silent. Elias drove an ice axe through the visor seam. The alien toppled without a sound. Inside the dome, the air was almost hot, -10, tropical by current standards. Elias felt his frostbite begin to burn as blood returned. The reactor itself was a sphere of black metal 20 meters across, humming with a sound that resonated in teeth and bone. They worked fast. Charges placed at stress points. Timers set to synchronized 0230 as they withdrew. Elias paused at a viewport overlooking the barracks dome. Through the glass he could see thousands of alien warriors sleeping in tears, armor off, bodies strangely fragile without it. They looked almost peaceful. He felt no hatred, only pity and the cold certainty of what had to be done. They were outside again when the first charge went off. The explosion was muffled by distance and snow, but the flash lit the sky like a second sun. Secondary blasts followed in chain reaction, beautiful and terrible. The reactor dome lifted off its foundations and came down crooked, venting white plasma that flash froze into glittering curtains. Alarms began to howl across the base. Elias's team ran behind them, the night filled with running figures. Searchlights, the roar of engines trying to start in cold that murdered batteries in seconds. One by one, the barracks domes lost pressure. Emergency bulkheads slammed, too late. Elias watched through binoculars as alien soldiers pounded on transparent aluminum. Mouths open in screams no one would ever hear. Skin turning blue, then black, then white as the heat fled. Some made it to shuttles. Most didn't. By 040, the base was a charnel house of frozen corpses and burning wreckage. A handful of ships lifted off, trailing smoke and sparks. Climbing for orbit on failing engines. Elias stood on a ridge and watched them go. Mira came up beside him, face illuminated by distant fires. "How many do you think we got?" "All of them," he said quietly. She was silent a long time. Then, "They'll send more." "Yes, will we be ready?" He looked north, where the stars hung low and sharp, and felt that vast quiet presence again, patient as stone. "We were ready the day we learned to make fire," he said. Far above, the fleeing shuttles began to tumble, gyros seized, hulls contracting in the ultimate cold of space. One by one, they fell back to Earth like dark snow. And on the ridge, 146 humans lifted their faces to the burning sky and began, very quietly, to sing. The song died with the wind. Elias Holt stood on the ridge above the smoking ruin of, alert, and felt the silence settle like fresh powder. 146 voices had lifted the old French-Canadian hymn, Un-Canadian Errant, carried it across the ice until the last note froze in the air and shattered. Now only the crackle of burning metal and the soft hiss of snow on snow remained. He tasted blood and cordite and something older, victory. Maybe, or just the copper tang of too many dead. Below, the alien base was a broken jaw of light. Domes had collapsed inward, their transparent skins starred with frost feathers. Shuttles lay canted on the ice like gutted whales. Here and there, a fusion core still burned with a cold blue flame that would not warm anything ever again. Mira appeared beside him, limping from a shard of shrapnel in her calf. She didn't seem to notice. "They're not coming back to pick up their dead," she said. "No," Elias answered. "They'll glass the site from orbit first. Standard protocol when a colony goes dark." He checked the sky. The alien fleet was still there, diminished, drifting, half crippled by the geostorm, but recovering. New signatures were accelerating from the dark side of the moon. Reinforcements. Bigger ships. Meaner ones. "We have maybe 72 hours, he said. Mira laughed once, a short cracked sound. 72 hours to do what? Walk to Mexico? To finish this. He turned and started down the ridge. The others fell in without orders. They had learned to read the set of his shoulders the way sailors read clouds. They marched south across the sea ice, dragging sleds of captured alien gear. The fusion heaters glowed like captive stars. Every few kilometers someone would fall and not get up. They left them where they lay, faces covered with whatever cloth could be spared. There was no time for graves, only promises whispered into the wind. "We'll come back when it's over." On the second night, they found refuge in an old DE line station, half swallowed by drifts. Inside, the emergency generator coughed to life on the last liter of diesel and gave them 4 hours of light and almost warmth. Someone found a tin of peaches in a cupboard. They passed it hand to hand like communion. Elias sat apart, studying the alien data shard on a cracked tablet. Lines of their script crawled across the screen, translated by a jury-rigged AI that kept apologizing for imperfect grammar. Mira dropped beside him. "What does it say?" "That we're animals." His voice was flat. "That our planet is strategically vital but ecologically unstable. That projected resistance was minimal because no rational species would choose to live in conditions like these." Mira snorted. "They read our summer tourism brochures." Elias scrolled further. His breath fogged the screen. "They have a word for beings like us," he said quietly. "Kethra. It means the ones who refuse to die politely. They consider it an insult." Mira leaned her head back against the concrete wall. Good. He kept reading until the tablet battery died. Then he sat in the dark and listened to the wind moan through broken windows and felt the presence again. Closer now. Patient, almost amused. At 0300 the shortwave crackled. A voice Elias hadn't heard in years. Frostbite actual. This is Toronto Resistance Relay. Do you copy? He lunged for the handset. Toronto, Frostbite. Reading you 5 by 5. Go. Static, then his mother's voice, older, thinner, but unmistakably hers. Eli? My God, Eli, is that you? He closed his eyes. The room around him vanished. Mom, you're alive. Barely, baby. We're in the catacombs under St. Mike's. The aliens took the surface 3 weeks ago, but the tunnels are ours. We heard what you did up north. The whole world heard. They're calling you the Ice Wolves now. Elias swallowed. How bad is it down there? A pause filled with distant gunfire. They're herding people into camps. The ones who won't go disappear. But something's changed. Their troops are sluggish. Machines failing. They're scared of the cold, Eli. Actually scared. He looked at the exhausted faces around him, black with frostbite and hope. Tell everyone to hold on, he said. We're coming south. Be careful, baby. The sky's full of them again. I know. We're bringing the weather with us. He signed off and looked at the others. New orders, he said. We're going home. No one cheered. They simply stood, shouldered packs, and walked back into the night. The journey south took 21 days. They followed the frozen coast of Hudson Bay, then cut inland along the old rail lines buried under drifts. Temperatures fell to -72, a record even for March. The alien fleet tried to intercept twice. Both times the attackers' engines iced over mid-descent, and the ships fell like stones. The humans never even fired a shot. Word spread faster than they could march. In every village, every bunker, every subway tunnel turned refuge. People emerged to watch the ice wolves pass. Some joined. Most simply stood in the snow and wept, because someone was still fighting. By the time they reached the ruins of Winnipeg, their number had swollen to almost 1,000. Farmers with shotguns, teenagers with Molotovs made from vodka bottles, an entire convent of nuns who had turned their habits white for camouflage and carried captured plasma rifles like crucifixes. Elias looked at them and felt something break open. Inside his chest, not weakness, but space. Room for something larger than survival. They camped in the shell of Investors Group Field. The turf was gone, replaced by ice thick enough to drive tanks on. Someone had painted a wolf howling at the aurora across the scoreboard in frozen blood. That night, Elias climbed the highest remaining bleacher and looked south. Toronto was still 800 kilometers away, but he could almost feel it, the city breathing, wounded but alive. Mira joined him. She carried 2 steaming mugs of something that might once have been coffee. We're not an army, she said. We're a plague. Elias took the mug. Good. Plagues don't surrender. She studied his face in the starlight. You believe he's watching, don't you? He didn't pretend to misunderstand. I believe something is, he said. Something that made a universe where the weak can inherit the cold if they're stubborn enough. Mira was quiet a long time. Then, my grandmother used to say God wears many faces. Tonight he's wearing ours. Below them, the camp began to sing again, this time O Canada in Cree and French and English all at once. The sound rose into the frozen sky and did not fall back. Far to the south, alien orbital sensors detected a heat bloom the size of a city. They classified it as insignificant. Campfires, perhaps. Refugees. They were wrong. It was 1,000 human hearts beating in the same stubborn rhythm, marching toward them through the dark, and the temperature kept falling, somewhere above the atmosphere. A new fleet prepared to burn the infestation from the third planet. They checked their chronometers, adjusted for local conditions, and began descent into what their strategists still called temperate zone. No one had told them the rules had changed. The wind shifted, bringing the smell of snow and pine and something fierce and unkillable. Elias Holt raised his mug to the stars. "Come on down," he whispered. "We've been keeping your seats warm." Behind him, the ice wolves finished their song and began, very quietly, to sharpen their teeth. And high above, unnoticed by alien sensors, the jet stream coiled like a serpent waking from long sleep, drawing Arctic air south in a river. Wider than continents, the real winter had not even started yet. They called the new offensive Operation Borealis. The aliens called it the final cleansing. Both sides were wrong. Elias Holt stood on the frozen surface of Lake Simcoe, 70 kilometers north of what was left of Toronto, and watched the sky split open for the third time in his life. This time the streaks were deliberate, orderly, beautiful in the way an execution is beautiful. 100 fresh invasion ships, sleek and silver black, descending in perfect formation through a dawn the color of dried blood. They had learned. These hulls were wrapped in thermal shielding. These troops wore triple redundant heated armor. These engines burned antimatter hot enough to melt. Permafrost on approach. They had come to finish the job. Elias's breath fogged the binoculars. His army, 12,000 now, if you counted the grandmothers with deer rifles and the children who carried ammunition, waited in trenches dug into the lake ice itself. They had painted everything white, even their faces. From orbit they looked like another pressure ridge, another snowfield, another nothing. He keyed the all net. "All stations, this is Wolf Actual. Hold fire until my mark. Let them land. Let them think they've won." Static answered, then 1,000 whispered chorus. "Copy. Wolf, holding. See you on the other side." "Sir." Elias lowered the glasses and looked at the people closest to him. Mira, her left arm in a sling made from an alien banner. Sister Agnes, the nun who had once been a sniper in a different war, rosary in one hand, plasma rifle in the other. Jonah, a 15-year-old Metis boy who had walked 500 kilometers, barefoot because his boots had frozen solid and shattered. All of them watching the sky with the same calm, terrible patience. The first wave touched down at 0617 local. The ice groaned under the weight but held. Landing ramps lowered like the petals of black flowers. Troops marched out in perfect lockstep, 25 million credits worth of war machine per soldier. Weapons glowing with stored heat. They formed up on the lake in parade ground squares, waiting for the next wave. Waiting for the humans to break and run. They waited a long time. At 0632. The temperature was minus 61 Celsius with a light wind out of the northwest. The aliens' thermal shielding bled orange, fighting the cold. They looked almost festive. Elias waited until the fifth wave was halfway down the ramps. Then he pressed the detonator. The lake exploded. Not with fire, fire was too small for this, but with sound and pressure and the raw fury of a continent that had been saving its anger for 200 years. Charges planted weeks earlier, scavenged from alien reactors, buried under the ice in patterns older than gunpowder, went off in perfect sequence. The entire surface of Lake Simcoe rose in a single sheet, fractured into house-sized plates, and tilted 45 degrees. The alien formation vanished under a white avalanche. Ships still on the ground were crushed like tin cans. Those in the air tried to climb and found their engines choking on supercooled air dense as water. One by one they stalled, fell, and hit the fractured ice with the sound of cathedral bells breaking. When the snow settled, the lake was a jagged chaos of bergs and steam and alien bodies tumbling in slow motion through the cracks. Elias stood. Now. The humans rose from the ice like ghosts given flesh. They came from trenches, from underwater tunnels, from snow caves dug into the bergs themselves. Some rode snowmobiles jury-rigged with alien plasma cannons. Others simply walked, firing from the hip, screaming things in a dozen languages that all meant the same. "This is our home." The battle lasted 43 minutes. It felt like 43 years. Elias moved through it the way a man moves through a dream he refuses to wake from. He saw Sister Agnes put 3 rounds through an alien officer's visor, then bless the corpse in Latin before moving on. He saw Jonah lob a satchel charge into a landed shuttle and ride the explosion like a surfboard. He saw Mira laughing again, that same mad laugh, as she carved a path with her kukri and her one good arm. He himself killed 7, maybe 8. He stopped counting when the ice axe in his right hand snapped and he switched to the captured plasma blade and kept going. When the last alien square broke and tried to retreat to the few ships still capable of flight, the sky answered for humanity. The polar vortex that had been teasing the jet stream for weeks finally committed. A wall of air colder than anything in recorded history, -8,200 with wind chill. Cold enough to freeze exposed flesh in seconds. Rolled south at hurricane speed. The retreating ships met it head-on. Elias watched through blood-spattered goggles as wings iced over in heartbeats. Control surfaces locked, antimatter containment flickered. One ship simply disintegrated mid-air, flash frozen into glittering dust. The rest fell burning, trailing sparks that died before they reached the ground. On the lake, the surviving aliens, those few who had reached cover, tried to dig in. They lasted 11 minutes. The cold peeled their armor like orange rind, cracked their visors, stopped their hearts mid-beat. When it was over, Elias stood alone in the center of the carnage. The wind had died to a whisper. The ice steamed gently around thousands of frozen statues. The only sound was his own breathing and the soft creak of settling bergs. He looked south. Toronto's skyline was visible on the horizon, skeletal, black against the rising sun. But standing, he keyed the open channel. "Toronto Resistance, this is Wolf Actual. Lake Simcoe is ours. The road is open. We're coming home." A new voice answered, young female, shaking with tears. "Wolf Actual, this is Toronto Free. Hurry, they're rounding up the children. Please hurry." Elias closed his eyes. "On our way," he said. He turned to the survivors. Fewer than 4,000 now, but enough. They were already moving, stripping the dead, reloading, bandaging wounds with strips torn from alien banners. No one needed orders anymore. They marched south along Highway 400. A white river of humanity flowing between walls of snow 20 meters high. The temperature never rose above -70. The wind sang across the ice in a single, steady note that sounded almost like a lullaby. Behind them, the lake began to refreeze, sealing the alien army in a tomb of blue glass that would not melt for 1,000 years. Ahead, Toronto waited, wounded, starving, defiant. Elias walked at the front, plasma blades slung across his back like a sword. Wooden cross warm against his chest despite the cold. He felt the presence again, vast and quiet. Walking beside him, though no footprints showed in the snow. Halfway to the city, they found the first roadside shrine. Someone had dragged an alien helmet onto a pole and painted beneath it, in frozen blood. They came in winter. They left in ice. Go home was TK. Elias paused long enough to touch the words. They were already icing over. Myra came up beside him. "How many more can they send?" she asked. "All of them," he said. "And it won't be enough." She studied his face. "You're not the same man who left Post 19. "No," he agreed. That man thought survival was the point. This one knows better. "What is the point, Eli?" He looked south, where smoke rose above the city in thin gray ribbons, reminding the universe whose planet this is. They walked on, behind them. The sun finally cleared the horizon, a dull red coin that gave no warmth but painted the snow the color of fresh blood. Ahead, The spire of the CN tower still stood, cracked but unbroken, a needle pointing at heaven like an accusation, and high above, the alien fleet gathered its remaining strength for one last time, preparing the orbital strike that would end the human problem forever. They did not know the strike would never fall, because winter had only just begun to fight. Somewhere in the stratosphere, a new storm was born, larger than continents, colder than space itself. And it was moving south with terrible purpose. The ice. Wolves lifted their faces to the wind and smiled with cracked lips. Let them come, the wind seemed to say. We have been waiting since the glaciers. The march into Toronto took 9 hours and cost no lives. The aliens had pulled every functioning unit to meet the ice wolves on Lake Simcoe. What remained in the city were skeleton garrisons, confused logistics officers, and the tall, silent overseers who had never expected to do their own fighting. They died in stairwells and subway tunnels, surprised by grandmothers with knitting needles and children with slingshots made from surgical tubing. By the time Elias's column reached the Doane Valley, the red and black banners of the invaders were already burning in the streets. Toronto welcomed them with silence first, the stunned hush of a city that had prepared itself for extinction. Then the cheering started, thin, cracked voices rising from sewers and cellars and the skeletal husks of skyscrapers. People came out into the snow barefoot, weeping, pressing frozen apples and candle stubs and rosaries into the hands of soldiers, who looked more like statues than men. Elias walked the last kilometer. Alone, he left his rifle with Myra at the barricade on Bloor Street and went forward, with only the plasma blade across his back and the wooden cross at his throat. The wind had carved the downtown into white canyons. Drifts filled the intersections to the second story. Streetcars protruded from the snow like the ribs of dead beasts. Every window was blind with frost. He found St. Michael's Cathedral half collapsed. The copper roof peeled back like a tin can, but the bell tower still stood. Inside, candles burned in red glass, hundreds of them, a constellation against the dark. People knelt in parkas and blankets, faces lit from below, murmuring the same prayer in a dozen languages. He almost turned away. He felt too dirty for this place, covered in alien blood that had frozen into black glass on his sleeves. A hand caught his sleeve. His mother. She looked 20 years older than the last holla he had of her, hair white as the snow outside. But her eyes were the same fierce gray. Eli. He tried to speak and couldn't. She simply pulled him down into an embrace that smelled of candle smoke and canned soup and home. He buried his face in her shoulder and shook with everything he had refused to feel for months. When he could breathe again, she held him at arm's length. They said you were dead, she whispered. Not yet. She smiled then, the same crooked smile he remembered from childhood, and pressed something into his hand, a new wooden cross, carved from the altar rail after the roof fell. Still warm from her pocket, for when the old one finally breaks, she said. He closed his fist around it and felt the tears freeze on his cheeks. Later, in the crypt beneath the cathedral, they brought him the children, 311 of them, rescued from the processing camp under Union Station. The youngest was 4. The oldest claimed 16 but looked 12. They sat in rows on blankets, eyes too large and thin faces, watching him with the wary stillness of animals that have learned trust is a trap. Elias knelt so he would not tower over them. I'm told you waited a long time, he said. A girl in the front row, braids, missing 2 front teeth, stood up. Are you the wolf man? He almost laughed. Some people call me that. She studied him solemnly. The bad stars said we had to go with them or everyone would die. We didn't want to. So they hurt us. Elias felt the rage rise, cold and clean. They won't hurt you again, he said. It was not a promise. It was a fact. The girl nodded once, as if that settled everything. and sat back down. That night the city fed the army with whatever could be thawed: canned beans, frozen moose, communion wine that had turned to slush. Someone found a working generator and strung Christmas lights along the nave. They flickered like stars inside the ruined cathedral. Elias stood watch on the roof. With Mayra and Sister Agnes, the temperature had fallen to -79. The air itself seemed to ring. Brittle as crystal dot above them, the alien fleet was gathering for the killing blow. 3 remaining motherships, each the size of Manhattan, sliding into geostationary orbit over the Great Lakes. Their main lances were charging, city killers that could turn the entire region into glass. Mira handed him the binoculars. They'll fire at local dawn. 6 hours. Elias glassed the sky. The ships hung like black moons, belly lights winking as they aligned targeting arrays. Sister Agnes clicked her rosary beads softly. And I looked, and behold a pale horse. "Not today, sister," Elias said. He keyed the captured alien command channel. They had learned the frequencies weeks ago, and broadcast in clear. "This is Lieutenant Elias Holt of the Human Resistance. You have 6 hours to leave this system forever. After that, we will consider any vessel in orbit a legitimate target. You have been warned." Static. Then a voice answered in perfect, accented English, cold, amused, ancient, primitive. "Your species is exhausted. Your ammunition is gone. Your children starve. Surrender, and we will be merciful." Elias looked down at the cathedral lit from within, at the faint glow of 300 rescued children sleeping under blankets for the first time in months. He pressed transmit again. "Mercy is not yours to give," he said. "This is our world. You are guests who forgot to wipe their feet. Leave, or we will teach you manners the hard way." He killed the channel. Mira raised an eyebrow. "Bluff?" "No," he said, and pointed north. Far beyond the horizon, the sky was turning white, not with dawn, but with storm. A wall of cloud taller than mountains marching south at jet stream speed, lit from within by constant lightning. Satellite imagery, what little still worked, showed temperatures inside the front at -110 Celsius. The kind of cold that killed satellites. The aliens saw it too. Their ships began frantic course corrections. Too late. The storm hit at 0400 local. It came without wind at first. Just a sudden crushing weight of cold. Thermometers shattered. Exposed metal screamed as it contracted. The 3 motherships fired emergency thrusters, trying to climb above the troposphere, but the air itself turned to crystal around them. Ice formed on hulls in seconds, kilometers thick, locking maneuvering jets, clogging intakes. One ship lost attitude control first. It rolled slowly, majestically, and began to fall. The second tried to sacrifice altitude for speed and tore itself apart on re-entry. The third simply stopped moving. A new moon of ice reflecting the sunrise that would never warm it. They hit the atmosphere like comets and burned all the way down. The impacts were felt in Montreal when the shaking stopped. Elias stepped outside the cathedral into air so cold it felt wet. Snow was falling upward, tiny diamonds caught in electrostatic updrafts. The temperature readout on his wrist read 112 degrees Celsius and kept dropping. Mira joined him, eyes wide. "That's not natural," she whispered. "No," Elias agreed. "It's not." He looked up. The sky was clear now, stars sharp enough to cut. Between them, something vast moved, not a ship, not storm, but presence. The quiet intelligence that had walked beside him since post-19. It regarded the frozen wrecks falling like dead stars. And Elias felt approval like warmth against his soul. He touched both crosses at his throat, old and new, and spoke to the night. "Thank you." The only answer was silence so complete he could hear his own. Heartbeat got inside the cathedral. The children were singing again, a high, fragile melody that carried through stone and snow and reached the edge of space itself. Elias listened until the song ended. Then he turned to Mayra. "Tell the fleet remnants they have 1 hour to run. After that, we start hunting the ones who stay." She grinned, feral and beautiful. "Yes, sir." As she left, Sister Agnes appeared in the doorway holding a steaming mug. "Cocoa," she said. "Real chocolate." Someone found a crate in the Archbishop's cellar. Elias took it with both hands. It burned his tongue and tasted like childhood. Far above, the last alien transmission flickered across every frequency, desperate, almost human. "Command, this is Vanguard. We are losing thermal integrity. Request immediate evac." Static. Elias sipped his cocoa and watched the final mothership fragment into 1,000 burning pieces that painted across the dawn. The war for Earth was not over, but for the first time since the invasion began, humanity was winning. And winter, God's own white hammer, had only just raised its arm. The morning after the motherships fell, the world was reborn in silence. No engines in the sky, no orbital bombardment sirens, only the soft, endless hush of snow settling on a planet that had decided, quietly and finally, to live. Elias Holt stood on the observation deck of what was left of the CN Tower. The spire had cracked at the 400-meter mark, leaving a jagged crown open to the wind, but the lower pod still hung like a steel fruit. From here he could see the entire city wrapped in white, streets erased, cars buried to their roofs, Lake Ontario frozen so hard it looked like polished marble all the way to Niagara. The temperature had stabilized at -91°C, cold enough that breath froze into glittering clouds that drifted downward like reverse rain. Mira joined him, carrying 2 steaming mugs. Real coffee this time, brewed on a captured fusion cell. "Fleet's gone," she said, handing him one. "Last stragglers jumped blind toward Proxima 10 hours ago. Left half their hulls behind." Elias sipped. "The heat hurt, a good hurt. They'll be back. Not soon. Their nearest base is 28 light years. And they'll have to explain why they lost 3 seed fleets to a pre-FTL species that still burns wood for heat." He almost smiled. "They'll call it an anomaly. They'll call it a nightmare." Below them, Toronto was waking up. Figures moved in the streets, tiny from this height, digging tunnels between buildings, dragging sleds of food and fuel, hanging laundry on lines strung between lampposts because even at -91, humans still needed clean socks. Someone had painted a new mural on the side of the Royal York, a wolf howling at 3 falling stars. The paint had frozen mid-stroke, giving the wolf teeth of ice. Myra leaned on the railing. "We lost 83% of the planet's population, Eli. Maybe more. Whole continents are dark. I know. We won't be the same world we defend." "It never was," he said. "We just forgot." She studied him. "You're not celebrating." He looked north, where the new ice sheet began, a white cliff 200 meters high, glowing pale blue in the low sun. Glaciers were advancing again, faster than any model had ever predicted. In a decade, the habitable zone would be a strip around the equator. In a century, maybe less, humanity had won the war and inherited a tomb or a cradle. Elias set the mug down. "Come with me." He led her down through the tower's frozen guts to the sub-basement levels the aliens had never found. There, in a vault once used for bank records, 100 scientists and engineers, survivors from McGill, Waterloo, even a few ex-NASA refugees, had built something in secret. They called it the Ark, not a ship. A seed, a fusion torus the size of a city bus, wrapped in alien superconductors and human desperation. Around it, racks of embryos, human, caribou, wolf, wheat, apple, honeybee, frozen in liquid nitrogen that would stay cold for 10,000 years if needed. Seed banks. Gene banks. Libraries etched into crystal that would survive the next ice age and the one after. Sister Agnes waited by the entrance, no longer carrying a rifle. She held a small silver aspergillum. Ready? She asked. Elias nodded. They walked the length of the chamber. Every surface was covered in names, millions of them, laser etched into the walls by survivors who had come here to leave something behind. Elias found the panel his mother had claimed and added his own beneath hers. Elias James Holt, I was cold, and I kept walking. Tell the next ones we loved. Tim Myra read it, and said nothing. Her eyes were bright. At the far end stood a cradle of black metal. Inside lay a single object, a wooden cross, the original one, worn smooth by his mother's hands, then his own. Beside it, the new one she had given him 2 nights ago. Elias placed both. Inside. Sister Agnes sprinkled holy water that flash froze into glittering dust before it touched the wood. For the day the sun comes back, she said. Softly. They sealed the vault at local noon. Outside, the city gathered. Not just Toronto, representatives had come from as far as Reykjavik and Magadan, walking or skiing or driving dogsleds across the new ice bridges. 50,000 people stood in the square below the tower, faces wrapped in scarves, holding candles that somehow stayed lit despite the wind. Elias stepped to the edge of the broken deck. No microphone. The air was so cold and still. Sound carried forever. He didn't give a speech. He simply raised his hand, palm open, and every voice in the square fell silent. Then, together, they sang, not a hymn, not an anthem, just a low, steady note, every throat making the same sound humans have made since the first fire in the first cave. A promise, we are still here. The note rose, became a chord, became a roar that shook snow from rooftops and rolled out across the frozen lake and up into the black sky, where no engines answered anymore. When it ended, Elias spoke the only words he had prepared. We are going south, he said. All of us. To the warm lands that are left. We will plant gardens on the equator and teach our children what snow feels like, by showing them the glaciers we were born under. We will remember the ones who didn't make it by living twice as fiercely. And if anyone, anything, ever comes back to this world looking for an easy conquest. He drew the captured plasma blade, ignited it, and drove it point down into the ice at his feet. The blue fire hissed and smoked, but did not melt the surface. They will find us waiting, he finished. With winter in our blood and fire in our hands. The crowd answered with a single word that cracked the air like a rifle shot. Always. That night the exodus began, a river of humanity flowing south along the frozen lakes and rivers. Dragging sleds, driving herds of caribou that had come down from the tundra, no longer cold enough for them. Carrying babies and books and the last violin in Ontario. They left the cities to the snow and the wolves, real wolves now. Not just the ones humans had named themselves. Elias walked at the rear, making sure no one was left behind. On the 3rd week, they crossed the new ice bridge at Detroit and entered what had once been the American Midwest. Corn stubble poked through snow like black spears. The temperature rose to a balmy -40. People took off their outer parkas and wept at the heat. They made camp on the shore of a frozen Lake Michigan. Someone started a bonfire with furniture from an abandoned mansion. Children chased each other around it, laughing in voices that sounded too loud after so much silence. Elias sat apart, sharpening the plasma blade with a whetstone because some habits die hard. A small figure approached, the girl from the cathedral, braids, missing teeth. She carried something wrapped in red cloth. For you, she said, and unfolded it. A new flag. White field, blue wolf rampant, 3 black stars falling. We voted, she said proudly. This is what we're calling ourselves now. Elias took it with both hands. The cloth was an old Toronto Maple Leafs jersey, bleached and re-dyed. Stitched by candlelight. He tied it to a broken hockey stick and planted it in the snow. Behind him, the fire roared higher. Someone began to play the violin, a slow, aching melody that might have been Ashokan Farewell or something older. Voices joined, hesitant at first, then stronger. Elias looked north one last time. Far beyond the horizon, the glaciers advanced under auras that never faded anymore. The Ark waited under Toronto's ruins, patient as scripture. And somewhere in the dark between stars, the enemy licked their wounds and wrote humanity's name in the column, marked never again. He touched the flag. Then the crosses at his throat, both of them warm now. Somehow closing parenthesis. The girl tugged his sleeve. Are we going to be okay? She asked. Elias looked down at her, then at the thousands of fires beginning to glow along the ice road south, then at the stars that no longer felt hostile. Yes, he said. We're going to be legends. Far above, unnoticed, the aurora flared once, green and violet and blood red. A curtain parting for something vast and quiet, and approving. Then it folded itself away. Satisfied. Winter had done its work. Spring, when it came, in 1,000 years or 10, would find the children of ice waiting with fire, and somewhere beneath a buried city, 2 small wooden crosses lay side by side in the dark, keeping watch until the world was warm enough for hope again. Years later, when the glaciers had marched all the way to the 40th parallel, and the sun rose weak and red over a white silence that stretched from pole to pole, travelers still spoke of the ice road. They said that if you walked far enough north, past the last outpost fires, past the wind-carved statues of the alien dead, you would come to a place where the snow never melted and the aurora burned every night like a living promise. There, half buried in blue ice, stood a tower broken at the crown, and at its foot a flag no wind could tear down, white cloth, blue wolf, 3 black stars falling forever. And if you were very quiet, you could still hear singing. It was the year 100 after winter. By the new calendar, a girl named Mara, great-granddaughter of the girl with braids and missing teeth, led a sled team across the frozen strait that had once been Lake Huron. She was 16. Small for her age, wrapped in wolf and caribou, eyes the color of glacier melt. Her dogs were huge, silver-gray beasts descended from the packs that had followed the ice wolf south. She was looking for the Ark. Every child learned the story. How Elias Holt and the last army of the North had buried the future beneath Toronto before walking into legend. How the vault was keyed to open only when the world was warm enough for children to play outside without coats. How 2 wooden crosses waited inside to be carried into the new spring by the first bare hands. Mara's grandmother had made her promise to find it. They found the tower on the 7th day, the CN spire, cracked open like a flower made of steel and ice, rising out of a pressure ridge taller than mountains. The flag still flew, threads of the old maple leaf's jersey somehow unrotted, colors bright against the snow. The wolf looked ready to leap. Mara's dog sat and whined, unwilling to go closer. She went alone. The ascent took hours. The stairs inside were solid ice, treacherous and beautiful. She climbed with crampons and an ice axe forged from a piece of alien hull. At the broken observation deck, she found what the stories said would be there, a circle of stones around a small fire pit. And in the stones a plasma blade driven point down, still humming faintly after a century, keeping a single patch of ground forever clear of snow. On the blade hung a strip of red cloth with words stitched in careful, frozen thread. When you read this, we will have one light a fire and wait for you. Se Simult Mara knelt. The air here was warmer, -12, almost tropical. Snowflakes melted on her cheeks like tears. She built a fire from the fatwood and matches every child carried. The flames caught, blue at first from alien metal residue, then honest orange. She waited. At local midnight, the aurora flared brighter than anyone alive had ever seen. Green and violet and blood-red curtains swept aside. And for one impossible moment, the sky was full of stars that moved. Ships. Not alien, human, sleek. White hulls with blue wolves painted on the prows. Fusion torches burning cold and clean. They descended in perfect formation, silent as snowfall, and settled around the tower like birds coming home, ramps lowered. People stepped out, tall, healthy, laughing, wearing light jackets despite the cold. Children ran ahead, barefoot in the snow, shouting in a language that was English and French and Cree, braided together into something new. One woman approached the fire. She was old, hair white as the glacier, eyes the same glacier melt blue as Mara's own. Around her neck hung 2 small wooden crosses on a single chain. She looked at Mara for a long time. "You're late," Mara said in the careful formal speech of the ice road. "Grandmother said you come when world warm enough for bare hands." The woman smiled. The crooked smile from every holla ever saved. "We had to grow new forests first," she said, "and teach the bees to fly again, and argue about whose turn it was to wake up. You know how family is." Mara's mouth fell open. The woman knelt so their eyes were level. "I'm told you kept the fire lit," she said softly. "Every outpost, every year. Someone sat vigil so we'd know the way home." Mara could only nod. The woman, legend-given flesh, reached out and touched the girl's cheek with fingers that had never known frostbite. "Thank you, little Wolf." Behind her, the newcomers were already unloading crates, apple saplings in pots, soil that smelled like summer, packets of seeds labeled in handwriting 100 years old. Someone had brought a violin. Mara found her voice. "Is it really spring?" The woman looked north, where the glacier still gleamed under the aurora, then south, where green shoots would soon push through permafrost that had begun, reluctantly, to thaw. "It's whatever we make it," she said. She offered her hand. Mara took it. The palm was warm. Together, they walked down the tower stairs, past walls where names still glowed faintly under century-old ice, past the flag that had never fallen, into a night suddenly full of voices and laughter and the smell of wood smoke that was not made from furniture. Behind them, the plasma blade finally flickered and died. Its power spent. The fire on the observation deck kept burning anyway, years later, when the first orchards were heavy with fruit, and children born under alien stars asked why their grandparents sometimes woke crying from dreams of cold. Mara would tell them the story. She would tell them how humanity crossed an ice age, carrying nothing but fire and memory. How they met the enemy in the dark and taught them what winter really means. How a man named Elias Holt once stood on a frozen lake with a broken army and told the universe whose planet this was, and how, when the long night finally ended, the descendants came home to find the fire still lit and a girl with glacier eyes waiting to welcome them. She would tell them the last words Elias Holt ever wrote, carved inside the Ark vault beside the crosses. "We were cold. We were afraid. We were human. And we refused to die politely." Then she would hand them an apple, red as old blood, sweet as forgiveness, and watch them bite, juice running down their chins in the warm sun. And somewhere, in whatever place legends go when their work is done, Elias Holt would smile the crook smile, touch the small scar where 2 crosses used to hang, and whisper to the quiet vast presence that had walked beside him so long ago, "We kept the fire." The answer would come back on the wind, patient as glaciers, warm as spring. "I know. I never doubted." And the Wolf flag would snap once in a breeze that smelled of pine and thaw. And the 3 black stars would keep falling, forever, reminders that some things are worth freezing for. The universe would remember. It always does.